All right. So psychiatric rehabilitation, in order to understand readiness, you have to understand what the processes are within rehabilitation that are the basis of what we're doing. So, change is more likely to be successful if a person has a positive relationship with a helper. The thing I love about research, despite the fact that I'm a researcher, is that we research things that in some ways seem so obvious. But guess what? There's research that proves that having a positive relationship with the helper is more likely to make change successful. I'm trying to focus here, folks. A person believes in his or her own self-efficacy. Change is more likely to be successful if a person believes in his or her own self-efficacy. Do you know the word self-efficacy? Some say no, some say yes. Self-efficacy is the feeling that I can, that I have some kind of mastery over something, that I am effective. Regardless of whether you can or not, it's the feeling that I can. So if a person believes that they can, they're more likely to be successful in change. Change is more likely to be successful if a person has positive expectations for the future. Here's another big duh. If you believe that the future is likely to be good, you are more likely to want to change to the future. If you believe that what is coming is horrible, guess what? You're not so likely to move in that direction. And we had studies about this. This is what kills me. But anyway, it's true. If you have positive expectations for the future, you're more likely to be successful in change. If a person sets his or her own goals, the change is more likely to be successful. What does this mean? It means that if someone else tells you what your goal is, you're less likely to do it. Surprise, surprise. Your mother tells you you should be a doctor. Maybe you will be a doctor, maybe you won't be a doctor. But until it becomes your goal, you're not likely to be that successful. I should say that my daughter has now decided to be an artist. Clearly not my goal. Anyway. But it's her goal, so she is more likely to be successful. That's another story. Change is more likely to be successful if a person is taught relevant skills. Surprise, surprise. If you teach people the skills they need to make the change successful, guess what? Change is more likely to be successful. So if you expect people to be able to do something, you're not going to get as far as if you teach people the skills they need to do the thing they're trying to change towards. Change is more likely to be successful if a person receives desired support. You know, support is not just the presence of another. I am sure that my daughter did not experience me as supportive just because I was her mother. Sometimes she experienced me as being interfering, maybe a little controlling, maybe, right? So support is in the eye of the beholder, yes? If I desire support and you offer something I desire, I am more likely to experience it as support. Again, not exactly rocket science here. But it turns out that it's true. If you offer people the support they desire, the change is more likely to be successful. Okay. So, we took all this and we did this. It's what we like to do at universities. Make simple things as complicated as possible and then teach a whole semester to understand it. This is my specialty, making the simple complicated. What you need to understand in this is that rehabilitation has phases. Understanding people's goals, understanding the skills and supports they have and they need to reach that goal, but coming up with a plan and then figuring out how you're going to teach people the skills they need, how you're going to give them the support that they need, how you're going to use the skills they have or use the supports they have. That's what all this says. It's within the context of a partnership. Remember a few hours ago when I talked about recovery, I talked about the importance of being in partnership. The framework of rehabilitation is partnership. Without partnership, there is no rehabilitation. You can do all the tasks, deliver all the interventions you want to deliver, and nothing will happen if there is no partnership. Partnership is not the same as paternalism. It is receiving the other as an equal and having a shared vision of where you're going and how to get there. That's partnership. All right, so readiness in the rehabilitation world has to do with success and satisfaction in a valued role. Why? Because that's the job of rehabilitation, focusing on a valued role. So the readiness question has to do with how ready am I to start thinking about this issue of a valued role and my success and satisfaction in it. What this part is here is that in rehabilitation, if someone is not ready, if they choose and decide, I am not ready to make this change, to change my identity, to develop some other kind of valued role than the one I have, they have again a choice. The choice is not either yes or no. The choice is either I'm not ready and I want to be ready, and we have some interventions that help people become more willing, more committed, or I'm not ready and I'm not interested, in which case I step out of rehabilitation and do something else, or I am interested, I am not ready, I understand that it'll be difficult for me, but I want to go ahead anyway, even if I'm not ready. So part of the process of assessing and developing readiness has to do with helping people at the end of the assessment process decide which of those things is the strategy for them. Is the strategy to go ahead with rehabilitation even if I'm not ready and just get more support? Is the strategy to stop and develop my readiness for change, get stronger in some of those elements, and then go back to rehabilitation? Is the strategy really, now that you've explained it and I understand my readiness, I'm not that interested in rehabilitation, thank you very much. I want a different service. I'm more interested in controlling my symptoms. I'm more interested, I think as Alila said at the beginning, maybe in focusing on my money problems. I'm not that interested in the valued role right now. Stepping out. Or just saying, you know what, this whole thing is too much, leave me alone, I'm going somewhere, I'm going away. So ending the whole thing, that's also a part of the strategy. So the purpose of assessing readiness is to help people understand at the end of it where they are relative to thinking about making this major change, and then choosing which of those strategies fits for them at this time. So what are the requirements of this process of rehabilitation? Like recovery, engaging in rehabilitation requires courage, persistence, the willingness to hope again, the willingness to accept setbacks, and rise yet again to work towards a goal. Why am I putting this here? Because I think we forget. You know, we're so busy doing all the technical stuff around making change and helping people fix things, and we forgot what it is we're asking people to do. If you have one identity and you're helping someone change identities, which is what happens when you change your valued roles, you go from living at home to working, that's a change in your role. When you go from being a single person to being married and having children, that's a big change in role. We're asking people for courage, the courage to go into something that is unknown and to change the way their life functions. The willingness to hope. You can't set a goal if you have no hope. A goal is a statement of hope. Is that clear? A goal means I have hope that something will be different and I can achieve it. So without hope, there is no goal setting. The willingness to understand, remember all those paths to recovery that I talked about, up and down and up and down and back and forth. You have to be willing, in order to commit yourself to change, to accept the fact that you are going 4 steps forward, 3 steps back, side step, this way, that way, that it will take time, that it's not an immediate thing. That's what it requires in order to make a change and stay committed. So the purpose of rehabilitation readiness is to help people feel more confident, more aware, and more committed to their rehabilitation. The process of assessing readiness, as well as developing readiness, has this as its goal. That's why it's not a checklist. You know, people say to me, do you have a tool? Give me the tool. Because what they want is to go, okay, boom, 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 yes, 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 I make a scale, now I know. That's not the point. The point is that the process of the assessment, the process of developing readiness in and of itself is designed to help people feel more confident, more aware, more committed to their rehabilitation. There are different kinds of readiness that we talk about. It's important to understand that. There's the general readiness for change, just readiness to change anything. There's readiness to engage in a specific program. It's a different kind of readiness. There's the readiness to continue a process I've already begun. So let me say a little bit about each of these. What time am I aiming for, Galia, the keeper of the clock here? No, I want to know, what time do you need me to finish? I don't, 27? Oh, 27 minutes. That's right. Okay, sorry. Sorry. Yes, well, I'm not that awake. You took my coffee. Readiness for change. Rehabilitation focuses on achieving a valued role. Changing from one role to another may require many other changes. A change in identity, social relationships, the level of energy that you need to live your life, behaviors. So changing a role implies many, many changes. And the notion of readiness for change is kind of accepting all of it, all the things that have to change in order for anything to occur. Readiness to engage in a program has to do with the fact that people may be ready to change roles, but not to work in a specific way. I may be ready to go from being at home to being a student. I may think that's a good idea. Thank you. You have to hide this because I'm not allowed to do this. Now I will be brilliant because I've had my caffeine. Anyway, but the person may not be ready to work in a specific way. Your agency, your organization works in a specific way. You have a particular perspective on a structured program and unstructured program. Specific providers. I only want psychiatrists. I never want psychiatrists. On how intense the program is, how casual it is. This program runs so many hours per week because I want to get it over with, this change, so I want to work every single day for 5 hours a day, or I can tolerate the change, but I only want to come once in a while. The program methods have to match the person's vision of the healing process. So there's a readiness to engage in a specific program, which is different from the readiness to make large-scale changes. Is that clear? So I tell you a little story that I've told before, and if you heard it before, I apologize. I smashed my elbow, really smashed my elbow, and I had surgery, yada, 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 yada. I go to my doctor and I see the physical therapist and the occupational therapist in order to get my arm back and my fingers moving and everything. The occupational therapist gives me a paper with 50 exercises on it, and says, this is what she actually said, I am empowering you. Here are the exercises. I will teach you. You have 2 sessions with me. I will teach you the exercises, and then you go off and be well. And I said to her, look at me. Do I look like a person who does exercises on a regular basis, really? You know, by myself? Makes no sense. My healing process was not going to be matched by this piece of paper and going off to be well. So I had a little spirited discussion, and I ended up with 6 sessions of OT per week for 7 months. Because for me, that structure is what kept me going. Going and having to do it every day with somebody is what kept me going, and as a result, I have my fingers back. Not everybody needs that. Some people would be horrified by the idea of having to go in and put their life on hold and go into therapy every day in order to do something. But I knew myself. I knew I couldn't do it on my own. The point is, you may be ready to change roles, but you may not be ready to work in the specific way that the organization has. That too has to be a match. The readiness to continue is again a different kind of readiness. We may be ready to make a change, we may be in the change process and all of a sudden hit roadblocks. Has anybody ever experienced that kind of problem? Yourself? Oh, sorry. Me, I have. Let me just tell you. Why? Because you're in the middle of the change process and there's a fear of failing. What if I can't really do this thing? Or there's also the fear of succeeding. Oh my God, I really am going to change? Or there's the fear of the unknown. If I become a different person, if I start doing things differently, how are people going to respond to me? Women have that crisis every time they cut their hair. Fear of the unknown. Fear of others' beliefs and expectations. If I put out all this energy to make this change, then people are going to think that I have to be a different person. What if I can't keep it up? Readiness remains an issue throughout a process. It's not just the beginning of a process, but readiness remains an issue throughout the entire process of change and is worth coming back to check on. Okay. The change I'm going to talk to you about today in 21 minutes and 27 seconds is a particular kind of change. Rehabilitation readiness crosses Prochaska's trans-theoretical model of change. So people often ask me, well, you know, what's the relationship of these two things? Prochaska, if you recall, talked about stages of change. Pre-contemplation. Does everybody know this, stages of change? Anybody not know? Don't be afraid. Thank you. The brave people are at the back, I see. So pre-contemplation means not only am I not ready to change, I'm not even ready to think about changing. That's what pre-contemplation means. Before contemplating. I don't want to hear about it. Don't talk to me about it. I'm not ready to even begin thinking about it. That's pre-contemplation. Contemplation is, yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. Gee, it would be nice if I could change. Yeah, other people might be happy if I could change. I'm going to think about it. You don't, anyway, I was going to sing a song, but I'll skip that part. In Oliver Twist, there's a passage where Fagin the thief says, I'm reviewing the situation. It's a batten and a batten I will stay. Anyway, that's contemplation. Yes, stay tuned for part 2. So contemplation is reviewing the situation, like Fagin says, but I'm not ready to act. I'm just ready to think about it. Then there's preparation, which is I'm putting all my pieces in place and I'm getting ready and I know I'm going to change and I'm getting my resources and I'm getting my thought process and I'm doing everything I have to do. And then action is the change. And then the last phase is maintenance. Once I've acted, then I have to do some things in order to keep the change going. Those are the phases that Prochaska identified mostly in the addictions field, in the field of substance abuse. And we've used it in many other fields since then. The readiness I'm talking about is focused on pre-contemplation and contemplation, helping people to move from I don't even want to think about it to I'm thinking about it to the point of preparation. Why? Because this part is where rehabilitation starts. Rehabilitation steps in to help people prepare and act on the change. So we're talking about how do you get to people to the point of preparation. Pre-contemplation and contemplation. So there are assumptions underlying rehabilitation readiness. First of all, the readiness we're talking about describes commitment and willingness, not capacity for change. You know, often people will say colloquially, like in everyday language, well, he's not ready to change. But what they mean is he doesn't have the skills he needs to really do that kind of work. Or he doesn't really have the resources he needs to go back to school. They're talking about readiness as a capacity issue. In rehabilitation, לשיקום, we don't talk about readiness as a capacity issue. Why? Because rehabilitation is about getting people the capacity to do the thing they need to do. That's what rehabilitation does. It provides people the skills and the supports and resources they need to make the change. So we don't care if people don't have the capacity. That's our job, is capacity. Right now we're interested in willingness. Willingness and commitment. Okay? The other thing is readiness changes over time. I've said this example before, so I hate repeating myself, but apparently I'm reduced to repeating myself. Has anyone other than me, and you better be honest this time because I'm tired of asking and getting no response. Has anyone other than me tried to go on a diet? All right, a few people. Friends. Okay. The point is that for me, I usually like to think about dieting somewhere in April or May. Why? Because the summer is coming. I live on the ocean. Boston is on the ocean. There are a lot of beaches. That means you have to wear a bathing suit. So somewhere around April or May, I notice I'm starting to get tense about what's on my plate, and I start to think, oh, bathing suit weather is here. If you ask me the same question in December, not so much, right? In December, I still have a long time. We're only skiing, and in skiing, you put on 47 layers anyway, nobody can see. The point is, readiness changes over time. It's not a personality trait. I can be ready today and not ready tomorrow, and vice versa. And the difference can be an internal change, it can be an external change, but readiness is fluid. It's fluid. It means that you can also affect it. Readiness is environmentally specific. I may be ready to make a change at work, but not ready to make a change at home. I may be ready for some specific things, but not for other things. So readiness is not global. It's tied to an environment, to a specific circumstance. Readiness, the readiness process we've developed, is not designed to exclude people from the rehabilitation process. So the readiness assessment process that I've been talking about and want to talk about is not designed to say these people are not ready for rehabilitation, we'll put them over here in this barn. And these people are ready for rehabilitation, these are the people we're going to work with. That's not the purpose of readiness assessment. As I mentioned before, and I will say it again, readiness assessment is a process that helps people get more confidence, become more aware, more committed to the possibility of engaging in rehabilitation. And when people finish this assessment, they still have choices they can make about the strategies of moving forward. So it's not exclusionary, it's not triaging who are the good guys and who are the people we don't want to work with. Readiness involves the person in assessing and developing willingness and preparation. That's the focus. I seem to be talking a lot because I only have 14 minutes left. So I said to you that choosing a valued role is important in rehabilitation. I wanted to give you a sense of matarot, the kind of goals that we talk about in rehabilitation. This is a goal statement from a rehabilitation perspective. I intend to live as a resident of the transitional apartments on Tremont Street in Boston by next October. So it has a timeline, it has a specific setting and a specific role. That's a goal statement in rehabilitation. When we talk about assessing readiness, we're talking about helping the person figure out, am I willing to begin a process which is going to end in being able to say something like this. I intend to work as a stock clerk at the Rockport Shoe Factory until next June. It's very real, it's very concrete, it's very specific. So when we ask readiness questions, it's about that kind of reality, whether people are ready to even begin thinking about this. Because remember, we're talking about people in pre-contemplation and contemplation. So there are factors, I think there are 5, I've forgotten how many, factors that we consider when we're looking at readiness for change in this sense. The first is need. The factor we call need. And the questions to answer when we are assessing need is, how unhappy am I really with how things are now? How unhappy am I really? And how successful or unsuccessful am I where I am at? So need is a reflection of the current situation. Why? Because if I think the current situation is A-OK, there's no willingness to change. It doesn't matter if you, the provider, thinks that my current situation is terrible. If I experience it as fine, there is no internal spark for change to occur. Clear? So the question of how successful am I is in the eyes of the environment. You have to gather perceptions of the people around you to understand if they see you as successful. Because you can think you're successful, but you're not successful until the environment says so, in terms of roles. That's different from satisfaction. Your satisfaction is inside you. No one else can tell you if you're satisfied or not. So need is a combination of external perception and internal experience. How unhappy am I really? Second factor, commitment to change. Bless you. It is possible, if you think about your own life, to be very, very unhappy but have no commitment to change. Yes? I can be miserable and not want anything to change. Hamlet said, I'd rather bear those ills I have than fly to others I know not of. You're getting a little Broadway musical, a little Shakespeare. Whatever works. Okay. So the questions of need are separate from the questions of commitment to change for that reason. They don't relate to each other. The question of commitment is, do I feel a need for change? Remember, I can feel miserable, but feel no need to change. So, do I see change as desirable? That's the first question of commitment. Do I see change as a desirable thing? Do I think it would be positive? Are there more pros than cons? Or is the amount of work that it will cost me to make this change so great that it's really not equal to the benefit that I see? You understand, we make this kind of internal calculations all the time. Okay, change might be a good thing, but gee, it's going to take so much from me to make that change happen. For the little good that it's going to come out of it, not. Okay, so that's the second question. Do I think it would be positive? Do I think it would be possible? I could think it's great. Yeah, I need to change. It's desirable. I would get more benefit out of it than the work. But you know what? I don't really think it's possible. Do I see it as possible? Can I see myself making this change happen? Can I see it? Can I imagine it? If I can't imagine it, I can't do it. Do I think it would be manageable? I may be able to imagine it, but I'm not sure I have all the resources and support to make it feasible. So we ask desirable, positive, possible, manageable. Those are the elements within the commitment to change. And remember, this is all from the perspective of the person. So it's not like we sit down and we say, do you think change is desirable? Yes? Okay, good. Next. It's a process of exploring these things. So the distinction between need and commitment is that need is the pressure to stay or go. It is the pressure to stay or go. Commitment is the desire, the pull to change. So need is a push, commitment is a pull. This is a way of trying to imagine it. Need is about the recognition of a problem. Commitment is about the hope for improvement. Need is about I have to. Commitment is about I want to. Need is about your experience of what's going on right now in your life. Commitment is about your expectations for the future. Both of those things are important in terms of understanding people's readiness for change. Need and commitment. Another factor is closeness or connecting styles. In order to go through any change, most people want and need to have the support of another. They want and need to have the support of another. In order for that support to work, there has to be a match in the style of support. Okay? So, what do I mean by that? You know, I give this example all the time in an American context, and I have no idea if it works in Israel. When men get together in Israel and they want to connect, what do? They watch football. Okay, good. I'm glad that we're not totally off the mark here. In America, people go out back and they play hoops. That's what they do. They go out, they play hoops for 3 hours, and they come in and they feel very close. Nobody says anything. It's a lot of and that's it. But people feel close because the style of connecting is physical. There's a physical style of connecting. Women typically, stereotypically on the other hand, pick up the telephone and they go, you know what she said? And then I felt, and then you felt, and we felt, and they felt, and then he said, and then we said. It's an emotional style of connecting. Imagine if you put those two things together and you try to offer support. One person will feel overwhelmed, and the other person will feel totally isolated. Because the connecting style is an important factor in change. There has to be connection. Connection happens with styles. That means people have to feel like this is a person like me that I can relate to. Doesn't have to be exactly like me, but at least can talk my language. Can you go out back and play hoops with me? You don't have to be like that, but you have to at least be able to do that. The other half of this is not only do you have to have matching connecting styles, but you have to have a matching sense of closeness, or some people prefer distance. They prefer distance, and they feel connected if you're distant. Some people prefer closeness. I always laugh when I go to Spain. I have to be careful in the elevator because people are like, there's no personal space. They're right in my face. And I like people. I mean, I'm, you know, one of these touchy people who hugs and everything, but I don't like people in my face. So, how close you prefer things, your preference for closeness or distance is an important factor in creating the process of change. That's one thing. The other thing is, if your preference is for isolation, getting support for change is more difficult. It doesn't mean it's impossible, it just means it's going to take more time. If you prefer isolation, some people prefer it, perfectly normal. Some people like to be alone. I think Greta Garbo said that, I want to be alone. You don't have to have a diagnosis to prefer isolation, it's just a style. It's going to take longer for change to happen. This is quite a comedy routine. Maybe I shouldn't have more coffee. All right, environmental awareness is another factor. How the change, remember we talked about role change, has something to do with how much do you already know about what's out there. How much do you understand about the world of environments and settings? Do you understand what roles are in a particular setting? Do you understand what it looks like, what the requirements are, what the responsibilities are? Because if you don't understand how environments, even in general, vary along those dimensions, you don't have enough knowledge to be able to make choices. So how much you know, not about, you know, the Rockland shoe factory versus the Bata shoe factory, that's for a later time. But if you don't even know that shoe factories vary along certain dimensions, that it's important to look at the size of the factory, that it's important to look at whether it has a union or it doesn't have a union. You don't understand enough about what is in that kind of environment, you can't even begin to think about it. So environmental awareness is another thing here. And, excuse me, environmental awareness and self-awareness is the last category. Okay, self-awareness. What do you have to know about yourself? Remember, we're in pre-contemplation and contemplation in order to be ready. You have to understand at least what your interests are. In general, what your interests are, because if you have no idea what your interests are, if somebody says to you, what's your interest, and your response is, I don't know, there's nothing to work with around trying to find a change that is going to actually fit for you. If you don't know anything about your values, if you don't know anything about your personal preferences, if you have no understanding about how you go about making a decision, change at this moment is very difficult. You have to at least understand those things about yourself in order to participate in a process for setting a goal and making a change. So I said, need, commitment, closeness, self-awareness, environmental awareness are the factors related to figuring out how ready I am to begin thinking about making a change. And this scale goes from 0 to 5. We say that a level 3 is sufficiently strong for people to be ready on that particular dimension. And in the interest of time, I just want to review this. The strategies that I mentioned before, independent of how strong or weak you are in readiness, you get to choose whether you go ahead and set a goal, whether you stop and develop readiness, you develop more of a commitment, you develop more of a sense of awareness of the environment or of yourself, you get an alternative service, you only stay in connection with the provider, you don't do anything. Somebody is calling me to tell me it's time to stop, and you disengage in the service. Okay, so my job is not to teach you how to do all these things, but just to let you know that these are parts of the process that you work with when you're learning to assess and develop readiness. So the essential elements of rehabilitation readiness are you determine how willing and prepared the person is to begin a process. Readiness is not a trait, it changes over time. The provider facilitates and educates, that's the role of the provider. The person makes the determination of how ready they are using the decision aids that I've shown you a little bit of. The meaning of the assessment is interpreted by the person. What will happen next is interpreted by the person. The choice of strategy depends on how interested the person is in rehabilitation as compared to something else. It's an it's an interactive process of education and analysis so that people can decide where they are along each of the factors and then what might improve. I want to say one little quick thing about commitment to change, because people always go, well, how do you do that? How do you make people more committed? If your pro and con balance scale is a lot of cons and not very many pros, you can give people small opportunities to try other changes that are not so big, to get more confident about their abilities to make change, to get more certainty that change is not such a terrible thing. Helping people try things out and then talking to them afterwards is a very good tool for increasing commitment to change. Okay, I put that aside. Final thoughts, because I'm getting the sign. Final thought. Readiness for rehabilitation is a moment in time. That's all it is, a moment in time, because you can do it again and again and again. When the self asks the implicit question, dare I even begin to think about beginning to look at a dream for my future? Thank you very much for your time.